And we're live. Hello and welcome to a special episode of Maddie Allen Live, where we have co-host Nuclear Herbs. Welcome.
Thank you, Maddie. This is actually my first time co-hosting this space, so hopefully I don't do something retarded. But we'll see how it goes over time here.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited that you could join us for the show today because I've been following all of your other podcasts that you've done surrounding the topic of the SEC losing their case against Hex, and Hex being one of the rare cryptocurrencies that has actually won against the SEC in court rather than getting dismissed by some sort of like political favor. And
Yeah,
so
that's been really important for people to, and I like how people have picked up on that, and they've commented a lot on a lot of other posts on Twitter where, um, where they're making that distinction, and I'm glad they are.
can you speak a little bit to like how this victory is different than other things we've seen recently?
Yeah, like I mean, if you talk about Consensus or Uniswap or even Coinbase. Coinbase was a joint stip where they both parties filed to dismiss. The SEC moved to dismiss their case against Coinbase, and Coinbase moved to dismiss their appeal in one joint stipulation. And that's not unexpected that they would go that route, but that just basically means that everybody took their football and went home. Um, the things like the Wells notice that went out to Uniswap or Consensus, those were investigations. They hadn't actually been formalized, and the SEC basically just decided to not pursue those anymore. So they closed those investigations. Robinhood, I think, too. They didn't they if you remember, like, we had the SEC was still sending out subpoenas like last month to people in the Hex and Pulse Chain community. They'd never stopped their investigation. They were still, pursuing this, looking for information from people. They had to be stopped by the court, and fortunately, that's what happened. I mean, that was a remarkably good decision. Nice, clean win. Pretty rare. That doesn't really happen. The SEC wins a lot of these type of cases, or at least forces a settlement. But I think we should all sit back and appreciate how good of a job Richard's team did. And I actually want to mention something on that in a little bit, but I'll let you talk for a second here.
Um, so yeah, this is, I guess, a top 5% win. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think Brett had that up on his page, an analysis of these. How many of these cases actually had been filed by the SEC, how many had resolved in their favor, how many had been dismissed by the court. Yeah, and it was like 5%. So
Yeah,
it
so
was
I
special.
want to come back to the topic of like the subpoenas that had come out a couple months ago. But first, can you explain a little bit of the amazing thread that you put together yesterday, having to do with I think that there were at least six kind of like reasons that you thought the SEC will be unacceptable if they wanted to amend anything
Yeah,
31
sure.
days.
If yeah, at the very end, the court, I think, kind of as a courtesy, gave the SEC 20 days to amend their complaint. It's not really all that unusual if the complaint gets dismissed for not having enough stuff in it. It's it happens sometimes. It doesn't happen other times. But I think she did it for she gave the SEC, I think, a courtesy 20 days in order to file something. The interesting part of it was the way she wrote it. She wrote, if the SEC believes in good faith, they can, file an amended complaint. Um, that's an interesting way of saying, like, all because by the federal rules of civil procedure, actually all rules of civil procedure, everything you file is supposed to be in good faith. So, like, her reminding them specifically of their ethical obligations was interesting to me because you don't normally
Ooh.
see apart. And maybe maybe she knows that after she spent 30 pages tearing them apart, that they probably are not gonna be able to file something in good faith and keep this case alive. And that's kind of why I went through the entire ruling piece by piece, chunk by chunk, and wanted to see exactly how she wrote things and what exactly it would take if I was the SEC uh, to even consider, consider filing an amended complaint. What would I need to do in order to comply with what the court told me was wrong with my complaint? And so I tried to detail that out pretty well,
Yeah,
and just
yeah. So you pointed out some nuance, some like lawyer speak that was in there, where the judge was actually coming at the SEC sideways, coming at them harder than maybe a layman would be able to read into. And that was one of the most interesting parts I thought about that analysis that you did, and even the point you just made now, where she had to remind them, oh, it has to be in good faith. Like, she didn't have to say that, did she?
no, and you don't ever really see a judge remind you that you're of your ethical obligations unless she's concerned that you're not going to meet your ethical obligations. So
Wow.
so there's
Wow.
that. It's that it's just some of those little things that strike you. um, when she says, hey, you filed this conclusory statement, or you failed to include this, or it's a little bit of a going behind the woodshed there. And she knew what she was saying, and she wanted to make it clear that the SEC did not do a particularly good job drafting their complaint. And I think that's been obvious from the start. But the SEC does tend to win things, even though they don't do a good job in their complaints a lot of times. So it's always it's always a guess as to whether or not you're going to win a motion to dismiss. They're pretty rarely granted anyway. I'm surprised that it. I'm surprised and very happy that it came out the way it did, and we should all be celebrating this.
Now, let me ask you if, basically we know that people such as myself, got a subpoena at, maybe 6 weeks ago. I think that they had intended to send it out earlier than that, but it was, I'm just curious for your analysis on whether they kind of knew maybe at that point where it had already been 60 days or 50 days into waiting for the judge's, feedback. Do you think that they were trying to get more information in order to make use of any 20-day period that they would get?
Yeah, well, yes, in general, I you don't send out subpoenas if you already have the information you need. I think they knew what was lacking, and I think that they were hoping to obtain some additional information that they could potentially use if they had if they had the option to either continue the case in whole or in part. And the things that they were looking for, and I've had some people kind of let me know what was in those. Um, the, they just don't exist. The facts that they were looking for don't exist. So, it doesn't really. I know that some people have just basically called up the SEC and said, "Hey, I don't have this information. I don't even have any of this information. And what do you want?" And they would just basically write an email to, Matthew Goldie or whoever is in charge there, and say, none of this shit exists. I don't have it, so I can't comply with your subpoena. And
Right. Yeah. Like for me, they were looking for, did Richard pay you? And it was like, oh, yeah, I already answered that before. And no, in the past 2 years, nothing is different there. So,
right.
yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is that gives me more confidence because I'm confident that Richard didn't pay anybody.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't heard of him paying anybody.
yeah.
So
And so, that actually, yeah, so that leads me to like two more questions actually. I want to ask, I want to like talk a little bit about the bar declaration, but before that, I'm wondering if you um, can help maybe any of the broadcasters and all the different people in Hex, such as myself, like, what does it mean now that we got this ruling from the judge? We haven't really even been able to talk to our lawyers yet about it. So it's like, like,
Well,
what,
I
like,
obviously recommend speaking to your counsel, because that's always the right answer. They will tell you what to do. If I was sitting here with a subpoena in front of me, luckily I'm not. I'd roll that thing up and smoke it right now because I don't give a shit anymore. But that is not legal advice for
right, right.
anybody ever.
Um,
You speak to your attorney and do exactly what they tell you to do.
exactly. Yeah. So are you saying that, like, through all the bravery that's been shown here, by the broadcasters not to back down when the government was wrong, you're saying that, like, now, like, now it's like it's over basically for at least the SEC part.
It should be, right? I mean, once I seriously doubt, like I said, I seriously doubt the SEC is going to be able to file an amended complaint. So I think they're just going to wave the white flag on this. So at the end of the 20 days, the court will enter a final order of dismissal, and it should be with prejudice, because that's um, when you lack personal jurisdiction, it should be with prejudice. So, and that just basically means that the SEC can't refile.
So they
They're
add that
theoretically,
on. Okay, so that comes later.
yeah,
Okay.
that'll be in the final order. Theoretically, the SEC would, I guess, technically have 60 days to file an appeal. But if they're not even going to bother trying to amend their complaint, there's, what would possibly be your basis for an appeal if, on that. So I don't see that as a realistic possibility. I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty long shot.
Is there anything you can think of that would not be an amendment, but would be something that would open them for appeal?
I don't see any reason. I don't really see a basis for appealing anything. The court laid out the facts that the SEC would have needed in order to have their complaint move forward, and then discussed pretty thoroughly why they didn't have the facts that they needed. Those facts don't have them because they don't exist. So trying to continue to push a case forward where there's no legitimate chance towards victory. There's no path for you to win. You can't prove your case. So it's time to walk away. Sometimes you just have to, realize where you are, and then call it a day. I mean, this happens in lots of legal cases where you're like, you take your best shot and it doesn't work, and then you walk.
That's good to hear. Yeah, they can take their ball and go home. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna mention this, and I don't ever talk about things I get in DM or an email unless I have permission. But I do have permission on this one, and I think it's really cool, and I think people will appreciate it. So, um, after the decision came out, I emailed David Kirk of Kirk and Ingram, who, if you were in the courtroom um, in October, he was one of the two guys who argued this case before the judge. And I just wanted to congratulate him on it because I thought they did a phenomenal job. And, and he and he went back and forth a few times, but he let me know that he really enjoyed the presentation, the thing that Zenith, SJ, and Will Stevenson did, where they read the transcript as if they were in the courtroom. He thought that was really cool, and
yeah,
and, and I'll say that I can read something he sent, and this is cool as hell. And I think it's nice to know that the people representing Richard believed in us and in the community, and weren't just there as hired guns. So what he said was, I've never seen such a vibrant and independent community in the crypto space through thick and thin. I would be surprised if the SEC has ever seen such a supportive turnout for the defense during and after a hearing in an enforcement case. So how cool is that to hear? Like, from, you know, just the legal team that just beat the SEC, and they actually like us. They're fans of our community. How cool is that?
That's incredibly awesome. Yeah, like the and when we interfaced with them afterwards, yeah, like there was so much mutual admiration there. And shout out to SJ who's listening right now.
Yeah, I see her. Hi,
Yeah,
SJ. I sent her that information before because I wasn't sure I was going to put it out on stream today, but I wanted her to know because she was part of the part of that whole deal. So
yeah, that's awesome. And so yeah, so when it comes to the bar declaration, I think it was when I was listening to it, the AI version that Gerardo made, um, I was like, it seemed like, even though he wasn't, it seemed like, oh, he's like ratting on Richard or something. But then,
no, I
but
never
then
got
when I
that.
saw like the judge ruling, and when I heard some of your commentary on it, I realized that like without the bar declaration, the judge wouldn't have really known how any of it worked.
Yeah, that's possibly true. I don't really think that it was the greatest idea for the SEC to include that or rely on that. But sometimes, I mean, you just have to go with what you have. And if the SEC didn't have anything else useful, and that's the best they could get, then sometimes you just have to move forward with knowing it's not the best thing you could have, or it's not your dream declaration or anything. But I mean, if that's all they have, then that's all they have. I don't think it hurt anything. I think, as I noted in the tweet I put out, like, um, if anything, it highlighted the fact that the SEC's case for jurisdiction was really, really weak. If you have to rely on basically Richard dealing with a volunteer coder and not a paid guy who just happened to, like, hey, I can help. If you want some additional help, I'm here for you. Um, Rather than being actually on official, like an official part of the team, as an official part of the dev team or whatever. I don't think it hurt Richard one bit. And then clearly the judge didn't think it was important, and I think even she mentioned that even if even if the SEC had put in the declaration that Barr was working in the United States at the time, which is a huge miss. I don't even know how they, to be honest with you, I have no idea how they didn't put that in there. But she said that still wouldn't be enough. I mean, all he did was just a few simple tasks. It wasn't. There's not going to be anywhere near enough to grab jurisdiction with that. With that one situation that they had. So that relationship that they had. So
I
yeah, I don't think it hurt Richard.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how much information she gave to be able to speak to, um, even if there. Can you help me unpack the part about even if there was jurisdiction, then the fraud claim wouldn't land?
Yeah, that's just simply it gets a little bit into the legal weeds, if you will, but when you when you lay out a claim for fraud, there's what's called a heightened pleading standard whenever you try to make a fraud claim. That's by court rule 9, I think, or something in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. If everybody's really, really bored, um, you have to do certain things. You have to specify certain statements or actions or something like that are fraudulent. You can't just put in a whole bunch of factual statements and say, somewhere in there all adds up to fraud. So just give it to us, judge. You have to be very specific with fraud claims because somebody has to know what they're defending. It's it, it so when she read that, and I talked about this in a Pulse Chain Law School post a long time ago. You have the fraud claim was weak from the start. It did not comply with the rules of civil procedure, and it didn't specify facts that are required to be specified. So there were in court, both sides were arguing over which test they should use to evaluate the fraud claim. And she basically said at the end, she's like, it doesn't really matter which one I use because your fraud claim sucks and it doesn't, and I couldn't let it move forward anyway. It would fail because you did not put forth enough facts that even if you proved everything that you wrote, you could still establish fraud. So there was no way that fraud was going to survive. That fraud claim was going to survive.
That's great to hear. And I mean, to go back to what we said before, it really matters that this was a case where it wasn't just it the court didn't just decide something trivially based on a technicality. Like there was uh there was actually
Right.
no meat on the bone whatsoever. uh
Yeah, actually, let me make that completely clear. Even if the court had found that she had jurisdiction over Richard, the fraud claim would still get tossed because it would not have it would have been tossed under a separate rule. The 12b2 is a jurisdiction argument. 12b6 is failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. She tossed it on 12b6 grounds, but even if she had found jurisdiction over Richard, that fraud claim was out anyway. So hopefully that makes
be-
sense. I know it gets a little
and
legalese here, but I'm trying to
yeah,
make that easy.
and that's because the timeline didn't match, right?
No, it's because the SEC didn't have the goods. They did not specify enough facts to say, you know, we want to. They were like, we want to prove X, Y, and Z, and she's like, yeah, but even if you prove X, Y, and Z, you still need to prove, AA, BB, and CC, and you didn't put anything in here, so you can't, you can't just halfway this claim, or you can't really half-ass a fraud claim, is I guess the best way to say that, and that's exactly what they
Oh,
did.
okay. So that was more. So that's not per se the timeline, but it's more when she said, like people got coins in the end anyway. Like people got their airdrop, and Pulse Chain does exist. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
not, yeah, but that wasn't the important part of it. Um like a motion to dismiss evaluates whether or not your complaint sucks or not. That's the best way I could say it. And if you because you put in a complaint all the things that you think you can prove, and they have to be related to elements of a claim. So with a fraud claim, if there are 5 elements to a fraud claim, you have to have facts in your complaint that go to each element. But if you only put in facts that relate to 3 elements of that fraud claim, your claim is getting tossed. Or if you put in facts that you can't really tell relate to that fraud claim, and you're just like, because again, you have to be very specific with fraud claims. You can't have general fraud claims. You have to be very specific. You have to identify specific statements or specific actions or something like that. And they didn't do any of that. So there was no way that fraud claim was going to survive anyway. Um,
right.
but it was just nice to see her. Basically, she tossed it out twice. Once on
Mhm.
jurisdiction grounds and once on you can't write a complaint grounds.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good way. That's a good way to put it. She threw it out twice.
Yeah, that's basically what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Brilliant. And so now I think one question I have is like, so this doesn't create a precedent in like the legal sense, but so maybe you can explain why that is, and then explain how this might still be required reading for crypto lawyers in the future.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's actually not. It's not precedential because well, first of all, it's a memorandum decision, and that's how you know it's not. And when you see a court put out a memorandum decision, that means they really didn't decide any new, novel area of law. No new legal principle or anything like that. It's just and personal jurisdiction law has been around for decades. It hasn't changed since I went to law school. It's the only thing is it it just kind of, the edges get trimmed off or added on to be based on, some new fact or technology or whatever. So when you evaluate a personal jurisdiction lawsuit or claim, it's a little bit, the nuance is like, okay, well, this time it has to do with blockchain, where a lot of the early personal jurisdiction web-based stuff didn't have blockchain involved, like the case she cited, Zippo, where it talks about whether or not you can grab personal jurisdiction off of a website based on how interactive that website is. That case was around before I went to law school. So there was a late 90s, I think it was like 97 case or something like that. I remember studying that in law school. So, um, but the general principle of whether or not you can haul somebody's ass in from another country and make them appear in the United States, the basic principles behind that are, have been around since the 40s, and they were refined significantly in the 80s with Burger King case. But it's nothing novel or nothing new that she decided. She just used existing case law. So I don't think she thought it was important enough that this became some sort of precedent that other people can rely on or needed to rely on. There's enough other cases that people can already use. They don't need an extra one that just says more or less the same thing. If that Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, and I guess was the suing code thing so absurd that it didn't, that it just now is a warning to future SEC crypto people to not do something so absurd, or
I guess. I mean, that was just, it was remarkable that it ever made it into a complaint. But it was it was disposed of relatively early. I mean, in the hearing where the court asked, are you abandoning the ridiculous argument or what, SEC?
yeah,
And the SEC, like, because they didn't respond to it in their response to Richard's motion. Richard's
right,
motion brought it up, but they didn't respond. And typically, what happens if you don't respond to somebody's argument, then the court can consider it waived. And that's exactly what the court did. And they typically will consider it waived, because if it wasn't important enough for you to comment on it, then why is a judge going to spend a lot of time on it, right? If you didn't care about it, then why should the judge care?
right,
So that's it.
yeah,
And I don't think,
and then
I don't think anybody's going to be dumb enough to file a lawsuit against code until the day that code becomes sentient. Maybe then we'll have a different story.
right, yeah, we'll save that for next year.
Yeah.
Um, so and then we saw some like legal, like, crypto Twitter people, like some bigger accounts, like picking up on it. There was one woman that you tweeted at that like ended up writing her own, summary of it. And so do you think that the SEC versus Hex case, do you think that all the other crypto lawyers at Coinbase and elsewhere, like, are they going to be made aware of this now, or it is it possible to stay off their radar?
Oh, I think everybody knows about it. It's it's such a rare occurrence that somebody in crypto beats the SEC, in a fair fight. That word gets around. It's not that big of a community. That the lawyers are a small community as it is, believe it or not, and then crypto lawyers are a fraction of that. So word spreads pretty quickly when something interesting or earth shattering happens, and beating the SEC straight up is kind of a big deal.
you know I made a comment when I was doing an interview with Adam Stokes yesterday that we some of the OA actions that we've seen, that uh, in that there was billions of dollars of hex staked, that played into the game theory of lowering the inflation rate in hex and making it more sound money, so to speak. But it may also influence listing on a centralized exchange. And I explained that basically there are only about 3 or 4 reasons I can think of why Pulse chain being it's the number one chain for volume that isn't listed on any centralized exchange, and
That's a
it's
good
it's
point.
like the
Yeah.
number four out of all of them, and so it yeah, it'll be really curious to me to see whether, I mean, it'll be curious to see whether the OA does anything with its liquid supply of Pulse and Pulse X. Um, I've half joked but have seriously said, the OA can the OA is allowed to fork my code for time pays me and lock up all their coins if that's all it's going to take for us to get a centralized exchange listing. But yeah, I think like getting the SEC stuff out of the way, that legally that was a major obstacle that's now been cleared. The OA's ownership of the tokens, that also influences central exchange listings. But then also just, the old Richards image of outrage marketing, which stopped people from buying the top of Hex, but also, wasn't really aligned with like the old brand of Hex being, you know, a wholesome thing of delaying gratification. So and then also just the fact that Richard used to be a Bitcoin maxi, and now he had vampire attacked and betrayed the Bitcoin community. That wound maybe has healed enough to where one of these three exchanges, Coinbase, Kraken, or Binance, one of them eventually might do the right thing and list us. So,
That would be nice. I mean, the regulatory thing is out of the way now, right? So, as long as Coinbase was being sued for selling unregistered securities or whatever and I think what did they name in the Coinbase lawsuit? They were going after them for selling, ADA and SAW and I can't remember AVAX and half a dozen other things that the SEC claimed were securities. So they believe that they had jurisdiction over those secondary sales. It was a nonsense case, and that's why it's gone. But um, the at this point, though, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the SEC thinks of Richard Hart's products. They can still believe all they want to that they're securities, but it doesn't matter anymore. They don't have any jurisdiction over him or his products. So
so what
it's
is so what does that mean for a centralized exchange? Is
that
it
means the SEC can't tell them that the SEC can't sue them for selling it
for
because they
selling
don't have
Pulse and Hex?
right. They don't have any jurisdiction over those products.
Even if those
So
exchanges they do have jurisdiction over the exchange, though. So, is there still a legal risk there?
I don't really see what that is. I would actually have that conversation with, I would actually like to hear what Coinbase's counsel thinks about that.
Mm,
Because I don't see, I mean, the reason why the SEC picked, you know, 10 or 12, uh, securities or things that it said were securities, and sued Coinbase over them was because they believe that they had jurisdiction over those, right? I mean, otherwise they would just sue them for selling everything, right?
right.
They picked certain ones in particular, and I don't know what their criteria was. I don't know if we will ever know what their criteria was for those choices. But the fact that they looked at the products that Coinbase had available for sale and narrowed it down to a specific few tells me that those are the ones that they believed that they had jurisdiction over, which means that there were ones in their mind they did not have jurisdiction over and therefore couldn't pursue a claim against Coinbase for selling them. And that's kind of the way I look at this. I may be wrong on that analysis, but that's kind of where the puzzle pieces click into place for me in my head. So maybe I don't know, but I'd like to hear Coinbase or Kraken or Binance like give me a reason now at this point why they wouldn't list it. at least Hex and Paul's.
Maybe if you or I tweeted at them with the right message, they would answer.
I'd be fine with that. Talk to me
Yeah.
offline. We'll put something together.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, because I'm going after this on every angle, because this is something that our community struggled with not having a listing for 5 years now. So
Right.
I love the outcome of the SEC case being that now it seems more clear that we deserve one. And so, yeah, that'll be
Yeah, and
cool.
I know it's much. I'm not a fan of centralized exchanges at all, but that is the way that a lot of people learn about new coins. Like, when you put in $100 into your exchange and you buy you know $50 worth of you know coin X or something like that. At least the next one that shows on the list. Hey, have you ever thought about buying these? At least they've got a page about information on it. You can learn something. Even if this is not the way that we really want to bring them into the ecosystem, and we don't want to have the centralized exchange risk involved for new people, but at least they can learn. I mean, you got to get them in the door before you can teach them anything.
Right. Yeah. And I've even made some suggestions lately that um, it would be cool if we had a version of PulseX that worked on Ethereum, so that people could get comfortable using an RH product,
Oh,
but
that's interesting.
before they take the leap onto a whole different chain. And even if we got one OG Ethereum whale, you know, to be comfortable with us, because they're getting such great swaps between ETH and USDC on Ethereum. That would, and it could, that could also be used, I think, to do more buy and burn on our chain. You would not have to issue another PulseX token, I don't think, on Ethereum. You could just, I guess it wouldn't be as decentralized if somebody had to click. But maybe the code could be written. I don't know. We got Gold Key listening here, so maybe him and Dipcatcher can think of think of a way to trustlessly buy and burn PulseX through fees generated by a copy of PulseX running on ETH. Um, but yeah, so.
Fascinating thought experiment, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's the same thing, like with having a listing on Coinbase. People can get comfortable, using a platform that they're already used to, and then they can um, you know get a better deal, because they're not going to have a spread and a bunch of fees tacked on. When I trade Ethereum or anything, I don't do it on Coinbase because I'm getting a better deal doing it on a decentralized exchange. So
Yeah, of
um,
course.
yeah, so that'll be interesting to see if there are any new approaches there. I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are, or your speculation about um, like the sacrifice address buying, um, or any other like moves that Richard is or like any other moves that are being made, in the ecosystem, whether this SEC thing getting dismissed, whether that changes the calculus um, for anything.
Yeah, I guess I don't really know how to answer that because I don't know why he did it in the first place. So I don't know how this decision factors into anything he was thinking, or anything that he maybe wanted to do that couldn't do, or didn't do yet, or has planned, or whatever. I don't know, man. It's just
Th-
he's such a mystery, and I don't even understand the stuff he actually does. So
th-
um,
I I think one thing that really impressed both of us um, was when it took a step back from all of the legal analysis, or when we looked at it closely too. It's like how much forethought Richard had put in to every YouTube appearance that he had made to this multi-year period of developing and launching Hex and putting Pulse Chain together, having a sacrifice, like all of Richard's actions um, were just so informed as to how the legal stuff would play
Yeah, no,
out.
I don't think it can be overstated how brilliantly, and I don't use that term lightly, but it was absolutely brilliant the way he planned out essentially every part of each you know distribution, sacrifice, offer, like the information that he put out on websites, the careful interaction he had, or non-interaction he had with people, what he decided to do on various social media platforms. There's so many tripwires that he could have triggered, and he'd be sitting here right now, still fighting the SEC. And somehow, and I have no idea how, he was able to see all of them, as if they were neon lights, and somehow avoid them all. Like I don't get it.
it,
Like it's it's literally brilliant. And I would love to ask him, like, how did you know to avoid all of these landmines? How? Like, I just, because some of them you couldn't even see at the time would be an issue later on, and he still managed to avoid them. It's amazing. So
Yeah, I mean, there's that saying that somebody smart can hit a target, um, but
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
somebody brilliant, hits a target you can't even see.
right.
Um, so yeah, like just from witnessing, Richard's pure pure brain power. Um, yeah, this this SEC dismissal, it reinforces this something that we already knew about Richard, which is he studies things, and I mean, like he studied the law, and there were all these ways that we already knew he had prepared in order to follow the law and everything. Like I asked him the last time he did a live stream, um was at the Hex conference online in January of 2023. And like I asked him, hey, like, you know, tell us again how Hex isn't a security. Right? And he broke it down, and I think that all the other things that the judge noticed, like with the website not giving customer support and different stuff like that, that he simply just thought of everything.
He really did. I mean, just
um,
not
and
not taking, for example, things that got Plexcore into a lot of trouble, like taking credit card payments, doing things in USD, specifically visiting the United States and talking about the project, all of those things that could have tripped him up. Telling people inside the United States, like, hey, if you, yeah, this is going to make you as a U.S. citizen, it's going to be great for you or whatever. We're talking about like some monetary policy inside the United States. He avoided everything. It's just amazing.
right,
Right.
right, and at the same time, uh, created such a successful project that we were in the top 5 coins by market cap in 2021, and we still have this wonderful community that the top lawyers in the world are bragging about. So,
Isn't
um,
that cool?
yeah.
That is the coolest thing I saw.
And I would extend that forward as well. Just my confidence in Richard. We already knew that he thinks of everything. We already knew a lot of stuff that we found out from this court ruling, but it impressed me even more to see all the details and to see Richard's actions over the past 5 or 6 years, that I've followed him, to see how they played out perfectly. as well as they could, given the regulatory environment, and that makes me much more confident going forward as well. That all of the cool game theory stuff that I can think of, I think Richard's already thought of that too, and
Yeah,
yeah.
considering that he launched Hex and planned it out and did all this stuff during a previous administration, right? And with a well before Gary Gensler ever got there, and he was still able to plan it literally perfectly down to the last detail through administrations, through a completely different SEC, through a war that really escalated on crypto, and then who knows what he's thinking of, and what he sees as a tripwire in the future, or as an opportunity maybe in the future. It's fantastic.
It gives me a lot of hope, and yeah. So I mean, another
It,
thing.
it
Go
sure
ahead.
does make you feel like you're in the right place, following the right guy, though, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like he's not like he lucked into this. He was smart enough to plan this, and that's who you want to follow.
and for anybody out there listening, like it's really important to remember the context that we're in right now, where there's low liquidity for a reason, and part of that reason is so that you know that the any money injected into the system, like we've seen in the past, where God Whale and the sacrifice address, they were both buying and sending the price of the coins up 10x, 20x in the case of Ink, between January and March last year, 1 year ago. Um, that basically, like, having lower liquidity, it can shake you out and it can scare you when you see the price drop. Um, I want to point out to people, even though it might not be like pure euphoria talk or something. I want to point out to everybody that I think it was Gold Key. It was actually Gold Key who's in the space now. He had made a tweet showing that the sacrifice address had bought $15 million of PulseX on, well, pretty much at the same moment that we got the news on Friday about the SEC losing their case. And I, I want to impress upon people that, like, without that action, we would have seen a probably a horrible sell the news event, and we would not only have had only red days this weekend, but we might be down 20 or 30% from where we started, on Thursday night or something. And so it's really clear to me that the whales and the OA and everything, like, they're they're kind of shepherding things in the right direction, and that there's probably a long-term plan here to reward, to to make it so that you don't have to be scared and sell on a dip. So um like, sometimes it's possible in crypto, where you get really good news and it doesn't translate to price appreciation immediately. And I think without the OA's action on Friday, I think that we would have been in a situation where you really you would really have to you would be tested, and we can't always rely on the SAC address stepping in and making everything perfect. So I would impress upon people that sometimes in crypto you can get bad news one day, and then that translates into great price appreciation a few weeks later. And it might be that some of this good news that we got legally, that it would lead to an exchange listing, or it would lead to some of the gatekeeping ending after all these years. And so I just want to remind people that um that it's two different worlds between like sometimes the price and the fundamentals, they don't add up all at once. And so um, at least that's what I'm telling myself is there's a lot of more good things that can come. And I don't think that the liquidity would have been lowered if we weren't being set up for something good that we're already starting to see with this legal news.
Yeah, and I'm wondering like when we're gonna start seeing things like some dominoes fall. Like, obviously the exchange listings and whatever, but when are we gonna start being ranked correctly? Like that case is still going on, I think, over
Mm,
in Arizona. I'll have to take a look and see where that's at. I haven't looked at that lately. Um, but that should be like an easy one. Like why would anybody bother fighting that? Why not just list it correctly? And it does damage to your
right.
own brand. Nobody trusts your brand when you're caught lying. So it would make way more sense for them to just go, no, we're gonna put you in the right spot from now on, and using the same criteria we use for everybody else. It is what it is.
Right.
I just Yeah, I'm not sure
Um,
what the resistance is there.
well, and with the OA's hex being burned now, I think it it makes the argument even easier to make because
It's a
I've
good point.
I've been saying for a lot of years that like, yeah, I mean, CoinMarketCap's listing criteria did say if coins aren't circulating, which the OA coins have been circulating, they have been acting, but basically they wanted to stop people from cheating and like, creating a billion supply of something, faking volume at $1, selling one token for $1, and now that's $1 billion market cap. Well, it's not really $1 billion market cap, and so
Right.
I think Hex, even giving them the greatest benefit of the doubt, at one time they could have said that Hex fell into a category of, oh, they're cheating the system and falsely inflating their market cap 10x because the founder has coins that are not being sold, so those are not part of the circulating supply. But then they list the Satoshi coins as part of the circulating supply of Bitcoin. And
Oh, right. Yeah.
so that's part of the nuance though of like they did publish criteria. However, the criteria that they posted said you have to be listed on some of these exchanges where you have to pay to get on. And they called them like data partners or something. And they said if you weren't on any of those exchanges that you had to pay to get on, then you didn't have enough real volume or like you didn't meet their criteria for listing in the top 200. Well, I would argue they're committing fraud by saying the only true crypto is traded on a centralized exchange, because that's not what crypto is. Like, that is the opposite of what crypto is. Crypto is where you hold your own keys, and otherwise we're just creating a glorified gambling new form of bank accounts, if it's like a centralized thing. So
Well,
anyway.
it would be smarter for them to just say you don't meet the criteria and then not have us on there at all. That instead of just going, we're intentionally putting you in the wrong spot and everybody's going to notice it. It would make way more sense to just say, just to search for hex and have it not show up at all, right?
I
Because what's
mean,
the argument? What's the argument for doing it wrong intentionally?
because, well, that they publish the rules ahead of time that like you can't be in the top 200 if you don't meet these extra criteria, that there's stricter criteria to be in the top 200 than to be in the top 2000.
But then realistically, it's not the top 200.
Right,
It's just
right,
they're just lying. They're lying to their customers because it's not
right.
the top 200.
It's a yeah, and that's what Johnny Cass would always say is like it's their shopping list. It's curated not based on market cap but based on you know their bribes, basically. I mean, so um
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with that now. I will have to take a look and find out what's going on with that particular case. I haven't looked at it in a long time. I
does
think, yeah.
go Um, does the ruling for the SEC case, does that have any bearing on the South Carolina hot dog case?
Interesting question. Okay, so what the court basically found was she did not have personal jurisdiction over Richard. Um, and that's an interesting argument because the procedure where that case is in in South Carolina. The last I remember it was they had made an attempt. They couldn't serve Richard the normal way, so they served him like via online telegram, whatever, But whether or not whether Richard could still make the same arguments there, that they don't have personal jurisdiction over him, and he could probably say, hey, listen, the district court in New York just went through this entire analysis and found that she didn't have that there was no jurisdiction over me. But the problem with that is that he would have to show up and make that argument. That's a personal argument to him, and people can't make that for him. Like, he showed up and made that argument in federal court. I don't know if he even has any interest in making that argument in some South Carolina state court or not. But if he did, I think he would be pretty successful at getting rid of it.
Can an intervener make that argument?
I don't know the answer to that. I
Okay.
really don't. And that might be state specific too.
Um,
Sorry, my wife's walking in and she's listening to the thing. So
oh,
you're
you're
going to get
good.
feedback.
Yeah. Since the South Carolina case, the class action lawsuit against Hex, since that like has already gone beyond, well, I think it's almost gone beyond like the question of jurisdiction. Is that a thing where like the case is already further along than is there jurisdiction? Question mark.
Yeah, I don't know procedurally exactly, but you know, jurisdiction is an argument that Richard can make at any time.
Ah, that's right. You said that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
cool.
never dies. It's one of the only things that I can think of in law that never dies. Like, there's no, you can't waive it after a certain amount of time. Like, a lot of things have set time in the rules where if you don't do something within 2 years after a judgment's entered, you can't challenge certain aspects of it or whatever. Jurisdiction is forever. So um, I guess theoretically he could just ignore it, let a judgment get put into place, and then show up the next day and say, hey, you don't have jurisdiction over me. I don't know. I guess it's up to whatever he wants to do.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that he sees this case as any kind of real threat or problem. And the kid's obviously got damages issues. I, I don't know that he's going to be able to prove it anyway. I
Right.
don't know that he's going to get a class action cert out of it, because that's now that we do have an intervener down there. I don't think that the speedy route, the express lane to a class certification, I think has been more or less shut down, or it's under construction at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the exact status is that like the judge like heard about the intervener, but then like put the case on pause because of like going to the because of like another issue there's being questioned over, I think the being served incorrectly and the abuse of Trevon James. And so I don't know that Ben Dubard has like officially been named as an intervener, but I know that he's
He,
positioned
he
to be.
does he does show up on the docket as as part of this case now. So I
Okay.
don't know what the official reading is on that, but
Okay.
or
Yeah.
what the judge knows. But I know he's in, and you can see that he's got counsel, and counsel record is listed for him on his behalf. So
Yeah. That's so cool that we have a Hexagon there that is willing to stand up and intervene.
yep, different kind of community, this place. I like it.
um, I wanted to get your take on a couple more things. So, do you think that? I mean, we already talked about legal precedent, do you think in terms of like Richard's latitudes, do you think that this outcome makes it easier or harder for him to do another sacrifice in the future?
Yeah, I might avoid it at this point, even though it turned out right this time. Um, I don't know why you would. I don't know. I don't know if you want to open another can of worms like that again. At least not anytime soon. I would wait for legislative and regulatory clarity.
Mm,
If I were telling him, like, even if you're thinking about it, just hold off until we get some laws passed defining which type of digital assets are going to be, what are the characteristics of digital assets that are going to be regulated by the uh, CFTC versus the SEC or whatever, or what are going to be considered domestic and what are going to be considered foreign, if for purposes of regulation at all. Um, so, I think we're going to see a whole lot of changes in the next year. This administration is not really moving slowly, that's for sure. So I think we'll start seeing at least some bare bones legislation, something we can look at and comment on, and as well as regulatory clarity from the SEC. Finally, they're going to start rulemaking on this as well once they know what essentially what the policies are that the administration is kind of looking to drive towards. So
yeah,
not much longer.
I think that, again, like Richard's shown a track record of acting, of creating just the right game theory and designing things just the right way to
Yeah,
where
I agree.
he can be innovative and he can be, you know 3 to 5 years ahead of the competition. And so if he, you know wanted to come up with, a 2.0, next level version of a sacrifice that had different mechanisms, or you had to burn something and then an airdrop
Right.
might happen, or I mean, when you have a 3000 level IQ, there's like lots of possibilities. And
Yeah.
so also, speaking of like the news that came out today, where we found out that that apparently the U.S. administration wants to create a
Well, the
strategic
reserve. Yeah.
crypto reserve that includes Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, Solana, and XRP.
Yeah. Well, at least they'll get to keep their Solana since they can't move it because the chain's always down.
Right, right.
It'll force them to hold that.
Yeah, yeah, it sure will. So yeah, so like, help us put into context or think through what this SEC ruling means in terms of us pitching Hex or Pulse Chain as things that are America first. Like, does this SEC case hurt the argument that Pulse Chain should be part of the strategic reserve?
I don't think so. I mean, this was essentially claims that were personal to Richard, right? Um, he didn't. This is not about like what Pulse Chain Incorporated did. This was all about did Richard register properly with the SEC? Did he, you know, tell? Did he disclose things that he was required to disclose? If it was a security, uh, did he, you know, make any material omissions in whatever his statements were, or some fraudulent statements? These were things that were essentially personal to Richard. I don't see any reason why that would prevent Pulse Chain from, I mean, which is obviously global, from moving forward or being considered as part of that reserve, provided that it met certain criteria, whatever the criteria is for that. Like, I don't know if it's a I don't know what it's going to look like yet, whether or not it's going to be ownership or validators or volume or market cap or whatever it's going to look like, where that it catches the attention of the U.S. government, and they say, this is something we should consider. But this is the next step for us, is to once we have once this case is now, it's almost over, but it's once it's completely over, we need to start thinking about the next step, which is, what do we want to see from the political side of our government? What do we want to see, and how do we make our voices heard? And
Right.
put together, make them understand that DeFi is a thing that it's a powerful group of people that believe in DeFi, and we have the money to change the outcome of elections. We have the money to put together a super PAC maybe at some point,
Right.
or PAC. These are the things that we need to start thinking down the road about, where we need to make sure that our position politically is in concrete, and not simply just a whole bunch of individuals who are looking for a number to go up so we can Lambo.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, we need to have like a strategy, and we need to yeah, like we need to do all the political things that are going to make us number one in that area as well.
Right. If we and it's this is the time to start thinking about that. So when we finally 100x, we have the ability to to fund something like that. And you pay for power in politics, right? So the more money you have, the more you get heard. So you know,
Right.
we'll see.
And one of the assets that we already have right now is the strength of our community here on Twitter and X. And so I want to encourage everybody. Oh, I think it just disappeared, but I had pinned a tweet that I made at David Sachs, and he's the crypto czar, of course. And so anybody who likes and shares that tweet increases the odds that David's going to see it. We know that he's active on Twitter. We know that like I've laid a lot of groundwork with him, which you can see in the tweet. I'm like, I have a selfie with all of his three co-hosts for his podcast that he's been doing for 220 weeks. And I had actually met him and gave him a $100 trillion bill with my contact information on it, um, as a symbol of like, this is why we need crypto, is like, because fiat currency doesn't always work out, as evidenced by this $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe that, like collapsed in value and isn't worth $100 trillion anymore. And I didn't get a chance to talk to him long, but I caught him on the way out. I shook his hand and I gave him that, and he thought it was cool and put it in his pocket. So, yeah, like, anybody listening to this space now, like, you can help to get, maybe it's going to take him hearing about Pulse Chain 10 times, but this is one time where if you hit like and share on the tweet that I have pinned, um, that's going to increase the odds that we're on the radar for the people who are deciding, what the United States of America buys for their crypto reserve. And I think a fork of Ethereum, something that they already have in their reserve, that has all these cool features like PulseX and Hex and everything. I think that would obviously be a really good buy for them. Um, so I want to encourage everybody to like, to keep up the good work with getting the word out and being so positive and being a community that world-class lawyers brag about. And Nuclear Herbs, I want to thank you so much for doing the interview here tonight.
Yeah, always good to see you, Maddie. I guess I'll see you in a few more days too, right?
That'd be great. Yeah. And Are there any closing thoughts that you have on any of this?
No, it's just we should really just enjoy this. It's such a rare occurrence where you beat the SEC essentially at their own game.
Yeah.
They're the ones who set the rules, and we stepped up and took them down. It was a clean knockout. And so just enjoy it. Like let's go have a lot of fun and meet some great people and hang out together in Vegas if you get the opportunity. I had a phenomenal time there last year with Maddie and SJ and a whole bunch of people that are you know I hope to see again. Um, so let's go have some fun.
Yeah, and I think people can probably still get tickets at pulsechaintour.com. So I want to plug that. And I also want to remind everybody that even if you can't make it out there in person, I will be hosting an online Pulse Chain conference the same dates as last year. So it'll be for the second anniversary of Pulse Chain launching in the middle of May is when we'll have that. So that's coming up here pretty quick in a couple months. And so another reason that helps having an online conference as well is that everybody from all around the world can participate. And so, yeah, thanks again to Nuclear Herbs. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. And yeah, and until next time, everybody follow myself and Nuclear Herbs here on Twitter and share out this Twitter Spaces if you enjoyed it. Until next time, stake wisely, my friends, and peace out.